Hi everyone, welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're gonna go over an adorable, easy, quick make that is perfect for back to school, back to work, back to reality as we leave summer break. Today, we're gonna make the Sewfisticated planner, and this comes to us from Sewfisticated Craft Designs. So this pattern actually comes in 3 different sizes. We're gonna be making the middle size, which is the classic size. So there's like a small size for your itty bitty goods, the middle size, which I'm gonna show you everything that's inside of this one, and then you have a larger one that's great for full-size notebooks. So this cutie patootie pattern has a flap on the front, it has a detailed accent on the side, and then a full main panel. You can have a lot of fun with your material here. I'm gonna say this is a great scrappy project. When we open it up, we have a clear pen pocket on the side. So you have a zipper pocket, clear pocket, slip pocket. I'm trying to do all this holding it. And then when we open up the other side, we have card slot pockets, 1, 2, 3, 4 card slot pockets, then 1, 2, 3, 3 accordion slip pockets, and a side slip pocket. And then in the middle, it'd be easier if I had it laying flat, we have a simple sleeve to hold your notebook. And it is clear vinyl, because clear vinyl is great. It has a little bit of a stickiness to it, and it holds things in place really well. So whether it's a small book, whether it's a notebook like what I'm using, whether it's a day planner, it's gonna hold it in place in the very center. Now all of the material for this planner actually comes from the most recent bag making Babe box. You're gonna get the wax canvas, you're gonna get all the water resistant canvas, kind of water resistant Oxford. You're gonna get all of the hardware you need, the zippers, the clear vinyl, everything like that. So the bag making Babe box is intended for beginner sewers, and each box we really focus on a different skill set, and we build off of prior boxes skill sets. So first we've just did sewing materials, doing a curve, a little bit of binding. We've done zipper installations, we've done hardware, magnetic snaps. So we're doing a lot of that now. We have curves, we have zipper, we have magnetic snaps. This time we're gonna be focusing on 2 things. We're gonna be focusing on thickness of seams, because we do have some fairly thick seams on this make. So we're gonna talk about needle sizes, we're gonna talk about tension, things like that. And then we're also going to talk about pattern adaptability for your skill set. That's something that was so important to me when I first started sewing, was seeing a pattern. First of all, I didn't really understand how to read the pattern. So going through the pattern on its own was a skill building exercise for me. But then realizing that my machine just couldn't handle some things. So maybe a material I picked was just too thick. Maybe my machine is just not strong enough. Some patterns really are written for industrial machines, and I always felt sad that I couldn't make those things because I didn't at the time have an industrial machine. So I have spent so much time focusing on adaptability of patterns, little tweaks I can make here and there to the pattern itself to make it work better for my material. So that's what we're gonna go over today. This first one that I just showed you, this was made entirely per the pattern. I did not modify anything. It can be done. I'm using a domestic machine. So if you have a domestic machine and you have the Babe box, you can make the planner exactly as the pattern has it laid out. You just have to be careful with some of the thick seams. However, during the tutorial today, I'm gonna try out a couple different things. I wanna try modifying some bits and pieces just a bit to help us with those thick seams. Specifically, I'll show you where. Specifically over here where the card slots are. We're gonna have some bigger seams here because of all the folding we're doing. And so I wanna play around with just a little bit of adaptation to make it maybe a tiny bit easier for me to sew these seams, and see if that helps you as well. So thank you as always to Sewfisticated Craft Designs for allowing me to feature your patterns on my channel. You guys know we go over this all the time. Sewfisticated Craft Designs have so many patterns. There are so many. You want to make something small, you want to make something really big, you want to make something you're going to literally take with you on every single vacation you go on, something you're going to use every single day, your everyday purse, your kid's backpack. I mean, literally whatever you can think of, they probably have a pattern for it. So go check out their website. If there's a pattern that you'd like to see featured on the channel, leave a comment down below. Thank you also to the Bag Making Babe Club for sponsoring today's video. The Babe box, like I've already said, is fantastic for beginners. It is a skill building box, so which means every month we kind of add a couple more things here and there. Most of the patterns really do focus on beginners, but sometimes we will take a more intermediate pattern and throw it into the box. And then that's where I'll kind of come in and show you how you can tweak things here and there to make it more beginner friendly, or the things you need to know to realize that maybe you're not as beginner as you think you are as a sewer. If you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shoutouts, leave them down in the comment section below. If there is a pattern you would love to see in the babe box, maybe you're a subscriber to the babe box, maybe you're interested in the babe box, if there's a pattern you want to see featured, please leave a comment down below. We're always looking for fun, new, good, middle of the road patterns for our babe box babes. All right, guys, let's get started. Okay, so for this planner, I'm gonna be making the classic size, which is like the medium size. And for that, I mean, the amount of material you need is really gonna differ. I have about a half a yard of exterior and a half a yard of interior material. I'm gonna use a lot more of the interior material than I am the exterior material. I mean, this is what I have left over because I really only use the exterior material for the 2 cuts of exterior pieces. So you can make this pretty scrappy. I will say this, if you're making all the card slots on the interior, you need lightweight material. We are going to be really kind of testing the limits today by using this water-resistant Oxford, water-resistant canvas Oxford. It's a water-resistant material, it's lightweight, it's thin, it works really nicely. However, when you start layering it a whole bunch, it can be a little difficult to sew through. So I'm gonna give you lots of tips along the way to make it easier, or maybe to just skip some parts if you're not quite sure about that. A great alternative for card slot pockets is a material called ripstop. It's pretty lightweight. It's drapey, but it doesn't fray. It's a preferred material for a lot of folks, but this is what I'm using today. Your exterior material, you should use something that is a little bit more durable. Wax canvas is perfect for that. I am not using any stabilizer at all. The pattern does recommend that you do use stabilizer. I'm not using any because I feel like the wax canvas really provides enough structure here. So here's the hardware I'll be using today. I have a small cut of zipper tape. The length of this zipper is going to depend on the size that you're making, but just one piece of number 5 plastic teeth zipper tape and a zipper pull to go with it. I have some binding here. This is going to be for the pockets, for detailing. It's super simple. We're not adding binding to the outside of this, but I will let you know you could. This is a pouch that we actually turn right side out. However, some of those seams get really thick. So if you are more comfortable using binding instead of turning it right side out, you can do that. We'll talk about it when we get to it. Then I also have a set of magnetic snaps here, just one set. And then I forgot to mention this with the material, but I would have at least a fat quarter of clear vinyl. All right, so here's most of the other stuff I'm gonna be using today. Some clips, as always, to hold things together, a pair of snips, I have a turning wand because we are turning this right side out, a stiletto, a erasing marker and a chalk marking tool, a lighter for cleaning up loose ends, a bag tag. Then I have some double-sided tape and a seam ripper and a 1" by 6" ruler as always. Let's talk about the thread for a minute. I'm gonna be top stitching the final stitches from the interior side of this planner, which means the bobbin thread is what I'm gonna see on the exterior. And I know that that never works out for me. So to make sure this looks good, in my bobbin, I am using this Mara 70 weight thread. So it's a little bit thicker than what I normally put in my bobbin, but it works. I have it already on my bobbin here. And it is pretty much the exact same color as my wax canvas. Let me see what color this is. I don't know the color name, but it's color 1341 if you want to get this. It's Gutermann Mara 70 weight, color 1341. It's a dark gray. It will not show at all on the finished product. So that's the goal. So for the thread going through my needle, I'm using a Tex 45 weight thread. This is from Wizardry Stitchery in color silver. For me, I don't want the top stitching to be very noticeable. I need it to be hidden. I want just the planner to be what you see. So that's why I'm kind of hiding my thread today. Oh, and before we move on, I wanted to mention the needles. I have 2 needles here. I have a Microtex 8012 and a Microtex 9014. I might need to use the thicker 9014 or a jeans needle in some spots. We'll talk about it when we get there. So let's go through the pattern pieces. First, we have pattern piece A, which is your flat panel. This is going to be exterior material. Then you have pattern piece B, which is your accent panel. This is just a little divider. Again, it's the exterior of the bag. I decided to use my lining material to give it a little contrast. So when we look at the finished product here, you see it's just this fun little contrast here. You could use the same wax canvas if you'd like. I think the stitching would actually look really cool with that, but I just wanted to use the purple for that. And then you have pattern piece C, which is your exterior panel. This together is what's going to build the outside of the bag, and this is the only exterior material I used at all. So like I said, you don't need a whole lot of material for that. Next we have pattern piece A1, and my lining is right side up, and this is the orientation of it. Make sure you're paying attention to that. So if you want it to open with the flap on the right and then the pockets on the left, you're gonna have it laying just like this. So kind of have an idea of how you want it to look in the end when you're tracing out your pattern pieces. If you want it the other way, if you want the flap to open on the left and this to open like that. The pattern is adaptable and it does have placement markings on it to help you with that. I don't know if you can see this, but this is pattern piece C1. This is the book sleeve, and this is just a piece of clear vinyl that's in the center of your planner. So once again, I'll show you how it works on the finished product. You can see I'll pull out my planner here. This is where it goes. And the nice thing about it is that it does help, because it's clear vinyl, it kind of sticks to whatever book you're putting in there, and you can just slide that in and it holds it in place just great. So I've had some people kind of ask, like, don't you think that it should be like fully from top to bottom? I don't think so. I think that this holds it in place perfectly as it's designed. Next, we have pattern piece D and D1. This is going to be for the zipper pocket. You're going to need 1 cut of your clear vinyl and 1 cut of lining. And then we have pattern piece Z, which is the zipper tab. All right, so let's discuss all the pieces that go with the card slot pockets. So I'm going to run through each one of these first, and then we'll discuss kind of my idea going forward with this. First, we have pattern piece E. This is a long strip of fabric. This is for the card slot pocket. We'll just pull this out as we go through it, I guess. The card slot pocket is right here. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 card slots. I don't find this challenging. I think a beginner could definitely do this, even with the material we're using. If you're not quite ready for this, you can skip this entirely. You can just leave this as a regular slip pocket. You don't have to add any of this stuff to it. Then we have the card slot side panels, pattern piece E1. You're gonna have 2 cuts of that. These just go on the sides of the card slot pocket. You'll notice that we do that a lot because we don't want to have these card slots in a seam that we have to fold back. So these are just the side panels that go right here on the sides. The side panel does get eaten up in the seam if you follow this. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Then we have pattern piece E2. This also goes with the card slot panel. And then we have pattern piece E3. Now this is a very, very long piece of material. This is your slip pocket that's kind of like a card slot pocket. You'll notice I have another piece of material right here. So let me explain why I have this extra piece of material and the measurement for it. So when we open this up, you see over here on the left side, we have 1, 2, 3 slip pockets that are built the same way as a card slot pocket, but it's going to be in the seam over here on the left. This seam becomes very thick. I would say beginners might struggle if they're using this material on this seam. It's very, very thick because after you do the accordion pocket, you're then gonna turn the whole thing right side out. And so you have double the layers here. So to assist with that, what I was gonna try is kind of what we do with the card slot pocket. So with the card slot pocket down here, we have side panels. I'm going to try, we'll see if it works out. I'm going to try adding 1 strip of material on the left side of my slip pocket accordion here to try to add that into the seam instead of having all of these. So I'll walk you through it, but the measurements of this is it's the height of the main panel, so whatever the main panel is, the height of that, and then it's 1 3/8 of an inch wide, okay? We'll see if this works. But what this will do, it'll end up moving this entire unit just to the right a little bit, right? It'll move this whole unit to the right just about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. That's the goal here. So then on the side right here, we'll just have a nice skinny piece of material that's thin, and we won't have this big bulky seam here. If you have experience with your machine and you're good with tension and thick needles, you'll be fine. However, if you're a beginner, which is what this whole kit is intended for, is for beginners, this might be a little challenging for you. So I'm gonna try to make it a little bit easier. And then finally, we have pattern piece E4, which is the slip pocket panel. All right, so let's start with the zipper pocket. You're gonna need your clear vinyl and your lining for the zipper pocket. You're gonna need your zipper for the zipper pocket with the zipper pull, and then the zipper tab, as well as some of your binding. So to start out, we're gonna take our zipper tab, and it's 1 piece of material. We're gonna turn it into 4 by just folding it in half, short sides coming together. Press right on that fold, grab your scissors, slide them in, and just cut it in half, and then cut each one of these in half as well. So once again, short sides together, meeting up, and cut. So now grab your zipper tape and attach your zipper pull. And with zipper tape, since it frays, I always like to grab a lighter and melt down the sides. Before you move on, make sure you measure your zipper tape so it's the exact size the pattern suggests. On the page that has the instructions for this, it does tell you what size the zipper needs to be. So for the kit, I know mine is a little longer than it needs to be, so make sure you trim that down. It is important. We don't want this to be longer since we're adding tabs to both sides. So now grab one of your tabs and lay it right side up, and then take your zipper and lay it right side up, lining up the end of the zipper with the short end of your tab. Grab your clips and clip this together. And then grab another one of your little tabs and you're going to lay it right side down so it's right sides together with your zipper tape, and then line up that short edge with the clipped edge and add it to the clip. So now your zipper is sandwiched between your two zipper tabs and your zipper tabs are both facing right sides together. Repeat with the other side and the other zipper tabs. Now take these two sandwiched ends to the sewing machine and sew along each one at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Once you have those zipper ends sewn on, you're going to press your two zipper tabs back, wrong sides together, lining them up edge to edge and corner to corner, and use some clips to hold that in place. Do this for the other side as well. And then just pull on these and give it a really good finger press to flatten out that seam. And then go to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along all four edges of these little squares at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I suggest starting and stopping on one of the raw edges so that way your top stitching threads look the neatest along the seam on the inside. So there you go, you should have a nice neat little zipper now that is fully enclosed on the ends. Okay, so now you're gonna grab your clear vinyl. This is a little tricky. And what you wanna do is you actually want to cut this off. So you wanna take 2 inches from one of the long edges and cut it there, long side, okay? So we're gonna measure 2 inches in from one long edge, and we're just gonna use our rotary cutter and just slice this down so you now have 2 pieces of clear vinyl. All right, so now with your 2 pieces of clear vinyl, you're going to pick the long edges on each one of them that you want to go around the zipper. So I'll show you. In the end, it'll be like this. Okay, so if you have like a printed clear vinyl, think about how you want the prints to line up. And then along each long edge that you want ending up with the zipper tape, you're going to put a piece of double-sided tape on the front and the back side. So I have 2 pieces of double-sided tape on each of my clear vinyls, but only along one long edge on each one of them. And that long edge is the one that goes with the zipper tape. So move the zipper tape out of the way. And what we're gonna do now is we're going to grab our binding. I'm gonna cut off this little piece here. And you're gonna cut your binding per the instructions, but really it just needs to be as long as your long edge of your clear vinyl. So I'm just kind of using that as my guide. Don't cut it too long. You do need this binding to do multiple things in the pattern. So try to keep it as close to the size that it is called for as possible. So now I'm going to take these 2 cuts of binding and I'm going to fold them. It's always hard to tell which side is the wrong side, which side is the right side. If you have the kit, the right side is just a little bit softer than the wrong side. The wrong side kind of has more of a gritty feel to it, and the right side is more of a cloth feel. So that's how you can tell. But you're going to fold this long sides together, wrong sides together, so you can create a crease on the midpoint. That's important. And I wanted to show you that sometimes this type of binding can have a little bit of a fray. I don't know if you guys can see that, but like tiny bit of a fray. If you notice that, just grab a lighter and melt down the edge where it's fraying, and it will just tuck it in and seal it. So always a quick fix. So do this for both of your binding cuts. So now take one of your binding cuts and lay it wrong side up, making sure you can see that fold on the middle. And then take one of your clear panels and take the paper off the double-sided tape on the back side of your clear panel. And then you're gonna lay your clear panel down, sticky side down, lining up the top edge of the clear panel with that middle crease. So you see when you do that, when you fold this over along that crease, it should meet up with the edge on the back and fully encloses. So once you're happy with that placement, take the paper off the other piece of double-sided tape and then fold over your binding to tape it in place. Now, some things don't work great with double-sided tape, like water-resistant canvas, so I'm also going to use clips here. But if you're using a quilt cotton or anything like that, it works really well. Here we go. So repeat that with your other piece of clear vinyl on the side that has the tape and your other binding cut. Okay, so let's lay this out. For me, in the end, my zipper pocket's gonna be on the right side of the lining. When the lining's totally open, the zipper pocket's on the right side. So I'm gonna lay this out how it's gonna look. The 2-inch wide cut of clear vinyl is gonna go on the right, and the thicker one is gonna go on the left, just like this, and the zipper will go right in between them. If you have a sew-in bag tag you wanna add, you can tuck it in right here underneath your binding and sew that down. So now grab your zipper tape and apply double-sided tape to both long edges right along the edge of your zipper tape. Lay your zipper right side up in between your two clear vinyl cuts, and the zipper when closing should be going up and away from you. We'll do this one side at a time. I'm going to remove the paper from the left side of the zipper, and then I'm going to take the clear vinyl on the left side, and I'm going to tape this over my zipper tape, keeping the folded edge about 1/8 of an inch away from the teeth. So you're just going to kind of eyeball this. Don't get it so close that you can like see the zipper tape going past the binding. You shouldn't have that. You should have it about 1/8 of an inch away from the teeth. Remove your clips. Okay, so if you find that your zipper is a little bit longer than the side of your clear vinyl here, I like to just center it, so I just kind of eyeball it, but I will center my clear vinyl panel with the binding on my zipper tape, so I have just like less than 1/8 of an inch overhang of my zipper tabs on each side. Just kind of eyeball that. It's okay if it's not exact. So now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna top stitch along the folded edge of our binding at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, attaching it to the zipper tape, and then we're gonna top stitch along the raw edge of our binding, also at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, to help hold down that edge. So just do like a rectangle around the entire binding fold. When I'm working with clear vinyl, I find it helpful to hold up the clear vinyl panel, and then you won't have any sticking. You'll notice that if you have your clear vinyl panel down on your metal bed here, it'll stick and be difficult to sew. But if you just hold it up, it should be pretty easy. So once I have that top stitched on, I'm going to trim down just the little tiny bit of overhang on my zipper tabs, just so it's all the same size. And the length of your clear vinyl is the correct size, so don't worry. Sometimes when we add those zipper tabs to our zipper, it makes it the result longer than we need it to be, so you can always trim it down. Okay, so now we're gonna repeat this with the other side. So lay your zipper right side up, take your remaining clear vinyl panel and line it up edge to edge. And if your binding overhangs your clear vinyl like mine does, I know it's so hard to see because it's clear. If your binding overhangs, just trim it down so it's the exact same length or width as your clear vinyl. It'll make it easier to line this up with the zipper. So now we can take the paper off the double-sided tape on the zipper, and then we're just going to lay our clear vinyl right side up over this, lining it up end to end and making sure that the folded edge of the binding is about 1/8 of an inch away from your zipper teeth. And just tape this all the way down. All right, make sure it all looks straight and that your zipper teeth are pretty straight going down between these, and then take this to the sewing machine and you're going to top stitch along the folded edge, the long edge, and the short edges, all at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. All right. It looks cute, right? I'm trying to get the reflection so you can see it. So you can see on the right side, I have the thinner piece of clear vinyl. On the left side, I have the wider piece. Zipper closes from bottom to top. Now grab your remaining piece of lining and you're gonna lay this right side up. And I do want to mention that the back side of this piece of material is going to be the inside of a slip pocket. So we're using water-resistant canvas, water-resistant Oxford. This is fine. If, however, you're using a quilt cotton or anything like that, I would double this piece up and then just put them wrong sides together and keep them wrong sides together as we go on to the next step so that you don't see that. But if you're using a material like I am, you can just leave this back side as is. It's fine as the inside of a pocket. So you're gonna lay this lining piece right side up, and then you're going to take your zipper panel and you're gonna lay it right side up over it. Now you should notice that your clear panel, your clear vinyl, is wider than the lining panel. That's okay. You're going to rotate this so that the thinner side that's on the right, for me, lines up with the long edge on the right. So that's where we're going to make sure we don't have any overhang. The wider side over here on the left, that can overhang the other part of our lining. So we're gonna just clip along these edges, and the short edges should match up pretty perfectly. And so you can see I didn't clip along the left side here because it overextends my lining quite a bit. That's okay. Since it's clear vinyl, I can actually see through it. So I can take this to the sewing machine and I can baste along all 4 edges using the lining as my guide to hold the clear vinyl to the lining panel. And then again over here on the overhang edge, just baste at 1/8 of an inch from the lining side. And then we can trim off the clear vinyl. Okay, so once you have that basted on, you should notice you have your overhang of your clear vinyl. You can just grab your scissors and just trim off that clear vinyl overhang. Okay, so once you have that basted and it's all trimmed down, grab your binding and you're going to cut this down so it's the same length as the long edges. And then with your binding, you're gonna once again fold it wrong sides together, long sides together, and then crease that fold to help mark the midpoint. Do this for both pieces of binding. And then you can use double-sided tape again here like you did when we did the clear vinyl and the zipper binding, or since this is a little bit thicker of a material you have here, you can just wrap the binding around the long outer edges of your zipper pocket and use clips to hold that in place. So completely enclose the long edges here. So now lay your pocket right side up with the shorter edge on the right and the longer edge on the left, zipper closing up towards the top. We're only gonna focus on the left side right now, and we're gonna top stitch along the inner edge of the binding, so the raw edge piece, at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end, but only this side, only the left side. All right, once you have that left side top stitched on, you can trim down any overhang so it's the same height as your pocket. Okay, and then leave the right side binding clipped in place. We're gonna deal with this later. So you can set this pocket to the side now. So now we're gonna work on the book sleeve. I'm trying to get the glare. This is what it looks like. It's curved on the top left corner, and then the right side and the bottom is nice and straight with a 90-degree angle on the bottom. Grab some of your binding and make sure you have enough to cover the long straight edge of your clear vinyl. And then take your binding and fold it long sides together, wrong sides together, and press so you have the midpoint clearly marked. And then you can use double-sided tape here like we've done before, or you can just wrap this around that long edge of your clear vinyl. Double-sided tape is really, really helpful if you're using a lighter weight clear vinyl like I am. If you're using a stiffer, thicker clear vinyl, I do want to mention that the top edge of the clear vinyl stays raw like this. So if you don't want the raw edge of your binding on the top like that, you can fold it down by about 1/4 of an inch or so, and then you can fold the short end of your binding down wrong sides together by about 1/4 of an inch. Make sure it's still covering the top corner of your clear vinyl, and then wrap that fold around the clear vinyl. So it's a little bit thicker right there at the top corner, but you don't have the raw edges of the binding showing. So now let's go to the sewing machine, and we're just gonna top stitch along the inner edge, the raw edge, not the folded edge, only the inner raw edge of our binding at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure you back stitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so now that you have your binding in place, you can trim off any overhang. So I have overhang on the bottom. If you left the top edge raw and you have overhang, trim it down. If you folded it down like I did and you have a little bit of overhang, just leave it, okay? Don't trim down the fold, because now it's just a raw edge and it's a mess. So your book sleeve is now good to go. You can set this to the side. All right, so now let's work on these card slots. This is optional. If you're not comfortable with this, you don't need to add it. However, in the end, it doesn't add a whole lot of bulk, so I do suggest you give it a shot. So I have my card slot panel, and I have horizontal lines on the right side per the pattern. So these measurements are all in the pattern. And then I have my 2 side panels that are gonna go with this. Make sure you know where the top is. So you might wanna use a pencil or something and mark T for where the top is. In case you move this around and you get switched around, you wanna make sure you know where that is at all times. Okay, so you're gonna notice on the pattern piece, there are solid lines and dashed lines. The dashed lines are your fold lines, and the solid lines are your alignment lines. So for example, I have my first line up here is a solid line. I'm gonna leave that alone. And then I have my second line, okay? That's gonna be a dashed line per the pattern, and that's where I'm gonna fold wrong sides together. So I'm just gonna press right along that line, and I mark this with a chalk pencil. So now I'm gonna take that fold and I'm gonna bring it up to that first line and align it with that first line. And I'm going to clip along the sides here to hold it in place. Now this is just temporary. We will have to do more work. Okay, so then I'm gonna leave the next line alone. Going down to the next top line of my little double lines here, I'm going to press right along that horizontal line, and I'm going to bring up that folded edge to meet that line that I can see here, which is an alignment line, and I'm just going to clip that in place. And as I'm doing this, you can flip this over and you can press really well on the folds that are developing on the wrong side. There's no lines for those, but just press to make sure that they stay there. All right, once again, I'm going to my next double, and on the top line, I'm going to fold wrong sides together, bring that up to meet the line below the fold before it, and clip in place. And once again, press on the back to get that bottom fold to stay. Your final line on the very, very bottom is another fold line. So you're going to press along that line, bring it up to meet, and press in place. So you can see as I'm doing this, I'm always making sure the sides are aligning. It's not starting to curve. If you have like a C going on here, that's not right. Make sure it's mostly a rectangle. It might not be perfect, but make sure it's as close to it as you can get. So you should now have 1, 2, 3, 4 folds for your card slots. This is on the right side. What we want to do now is we want to top stitch along each one of these folds on their own. So what I do is I just move the clips down, starting with the top fold. I'll move the top piece of my water resistant canvas away, and you want to top stitch only on the fold. After you're done with one fold, you're going to take the clips off, you're going to move that finished fold out of the way, and then top stitch along the next fold. Keep removing clips. It's going to be separated, but I like to keep it together as much as possible before that. I feel like it just helps make sure nothing gets too wonky before we sew it. So you're going to top stitch along each one of these folds at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure you back stitch at the beginning and the end. So after you do the top stitching, you should notice that it all kind of falls apart. Just once again, make sure you know where the top is and that you have it right side up, and you can just refold these. It should be pretty easy to just fold up each top stitched fold now with its previous marked line. Okay, so as you're sewing these, you want this to be as close to the same height as your side panels. So if you notice that it's like significantly shorter, you can rearrange these pockets just a bit to make sure it fits. Just make sure you always kind of double check with a card so that you can still, use it properly. That looks good. Yeah, that looks good. All right, and if it's a little bit shorter than the side panels, that's okay. We can trim down the side panels. There's a lot of wiggle room here if it's not perfect, okay? So don't freak out. So now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and we're just gonna baste along the sides of the card slot at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance to hold this rectangle in place just like this. I suggest starting from the bottom of the card slots and going up on each side. Don't start from the bottom on one side and the top on the other side, because then they will be crooked. Alrighty, once you have that basted in place, you're going to take your two side panels here and you're going to lay them right side down, lining up the long edges with the side edges of your card slot pocket, and clip these right sides together on both sides. And now sew along each of these clipped edges at 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. So now once you have these side panels sewn on, you're going to take them and press them away from the card slot panels. You can press it with an iron or just give it a good finger press. And then keeping the seam behind the side panels, you're going to top stitch along that folded edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance on both sides, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Now grab your card slot lining panel and you're going to lay it right side down, right sides together with your card slot panel, matching up the top edge. That's what we're focused on, the top edge. And if you notice your card slot panel is a little bit wider than the lining panel, that's okay. Just do your best to center it and then clip along this top edge. And now we're going to sew along this top edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Once you have that sewn, press the card slot lining piece up, give it a good finger press right along that seam, and then pull it back and press it wrong sides together with the card slot panel. And bring the bottom edge down to meet the bottom edge of the card slots and clip along all 4 edges. My card slot panel, the sides are a little bit wider than my lining panel. That's okay. If you want, you can grab a ruler and a rotary cutter and just slice off the ends, or holding it together really tightly, you can grab your scissors and just trim down the sides so the card slot panel is the same width as the lining panel. The lining panel is our guide here. So just make sure you press it really well. It's nice and flat, and then you can trim it down. And then once you have them the same size, just clip along the edges. And then this top folded edge, just make sure it's nice and straight and neat, and press or use clips to flatten that out. All right, once you have it all flattened out and lined up, we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch around all 4 edges of this card slot panel at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I suggest starting on one of the raw edges so that way when you top stitch over the folded edge, it's nice and clean and neat. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. All right, so once you have this all top stitched and basted together, you can set this to the side. So now we're gonna make the slip pockets, and this is gonna be done very similar to the card slot pocket. So you should have 1, 2, 3, 4 lines marked on the right side of your long slip pockets. And you're going to mark the top, and from the top, we're gonna skip that first line, we're gonna go down to the second line, and we're going to press the material wrong sides together. So we have a nice fold, and we're gonna bring that fold up to that first line, lay it there, clip along the sides to hold it in place. Then you're gonna skip over the third line and go to the bottom marked line and press along that nice and tight and fold that up to meet that third line and press it down. So you should now have 2 slip pockets. Make sure the sides are lined up. Grab your pattern piece E4 and just make sure these are the same size. They should be the same height and everything. There we go. Once you're good with that, we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to fold the top of our slip pocket out of the way, and we're going to top stitch along each of these folds at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, only top stitching on the fold, not sewing it down to the panel behind it, back stitch at the beginning and the end. Once those folds are top stitched, you can refold your slip panels so that they're exactly where they belong. Again, make sure it's the same height as your lining. It's okay if it's a tiny bit different. We can always trim things down, but get it as close as possible. And then take this to the sewing machine and just baste along the sides of these slip pockets at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance to hold in place. Okay, so now with your slip pocket accordion facing right side up, grab your card slot panel, and you're gonna lay your card slot panel right along the bottom of your slip pocket. So line it up corner to corner on the bottom corners and edge to edge on the sides, and clip this in place. And now take this to the sewing machine and baste this card slot panel on to the slip pockets at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance along the sides and the bottom edge. Okay, so here's where I want to talk about the adaptation that I'm going to try. In the end, this slip pocket unit here is going to be in the final seam, and this planner is turned right side out. So this seam right here where it gets pretty thick, in the end, it's actually going to be twice as thick, at least. It's actually going to be more than that because you're also going to have the wax canvas folded in here. So you're going to have 2 layers of wax canvas, and this seam is going to be folded. It gets very, very thick. And I think that with the waterproof canvas, it's a little too thick, especially for beginners. We're going to give this a try. So I have my cut of extra material here, and it should be the same height as this slip pocket. And I made mine 1 3/8 of an inch wide for now. If I decide that that's too wide and I want to, make it a little bit more narrow, I can do that later. But for now, I think that's a good size. I'm going to take this strip, and on the left side of my slip pocket unit, I'm going to lay this right side down, lining it up with that long edge and clip in place. And now I'm going to go sew along this long clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Okay, and you could have sewn that on at a 1/4 inch or a 3/8 inch seam allowance. It'd probably be more cohesive if I did a 1/4 inch, because that's what I'm going to be sewing the slip pocket on the right side here. So once you have this sewn on, we can trim down the corners. So that helps reduce the bulk. And then we can press this panel away from the card slots and make sure the seam stays behind this strip on the left side here. And then we can just take this to the sewing machine and top stitch along this strip at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Okay, so let's work this out together, because now you see this is going to extend a bit further in than originally. So if we have the seam allowance we're going to lose here on the right side, we have this extending in about 3/4 of an inch further than it does now. So this will end up being pushed to the right 3/4 of an inch, just like that. Okay, so if you're following along with me and you made your E4 panel wider like I suggested in the beginning, then we have some options here, okay? You should notice that it is a bit wider than your slip pocket. So we have to attach this liner panel to our side of our slip pocket unit here, and this is still really bulky. So we can do this one of 2 ways. We're gonna lay this right side down and clip these right sides together, lining up that right edge. Okay, so do that first. And then I'm gonna sew along this edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and that's just because I sewed my small strip on at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. If you did your thin strip at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, then I would suggest matching that on this side. But I'm gonna do a 3/8 inch seam allowance along this edge, back stitching at the beginning and the end. All right, once you have that sewn on, trim down the corners to help reduce the bulk, because we're gonna have some bulk here. And then you're gonna press this backing away from the main panel. So now let's discuss this. You could do it as the pattern suggests, and you're just going to fold right along that seam, just like that. Now, you might notice this can get very thick, all right? You can do it. I would suggest switching over to a 90-14 needle or a jeans needle. Take your time, be careful, but if you're a beginner sewer and you're working with this material and you're like, that is really too thick, I had a hard enough time going over it just like when I was sewing the lining panel on. Another option is to just press the lining panel away, just like we did on the shorter edge over here. And then what we'll do is we'll top stitch right along this edge with the seam behind the lining panel, and then we can just wrap that lining panel around the seam. So the method I'm gonna use is going to be the one that I think will be the easiest, but it's going to be the one that takes up the most space as well in the end. So like I said, if you feel comfortable folding it right along that seam and top stitching the bulk, then go for it. Otherwise, I'm going to just lay these both flat open, and I'm gonna top stitch along the lining portion of the seam at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, holding that seam behind that lining portion. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. So now I'm gonna take that slip pocket panel and I'm just gonna wrap it around the seam. So I'm not folding the seam back, I'm just wrapping the material around it. And I'm gonna have my opposite edge come to meet. And if you used a 1/4 inch seam allowance, you might notice that when you bring these long edges back, wrong sides together, it's not a very tight fold around the seam. That's okay. You can tighten it and you can have the long edge on the left here on the back panel kind of overextending and then trim it down, or you can leave it a little loosey-goosey. It's totally up to you. But I'm just gonna wrap this around and clip along this edge. And then I'm also going to clip along the top and bottom short edges to hold this in place. Okay, so again, if you're following my kind of hokey pokey method here, it should look just like this. If you're following the pattern, then check the pattern. It's gonna look different. It's just not gonna have these sides pieces outside the slip pockets. But I'm gonna take this to the sewing machine and I'm gonna baste along the top and then the left raw edge and the bottom edges all at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm not gonna top stitch along the fold over here on the very right because I don't feel like I need to. If you want to top stitch there, you can. Okay, so if you're following along with my method, this panel now is 3/4 of an inch wider than what it would be if we followed the pattern. Now, since I've already made this, I can kind of see what that's gonna look like. So we're gonna have a 1/4 inch seam allowance on the left side here in the end. So I can kind of account for that. I like to have my notebook in here while I do this. So I'm just gonna lay my ruler underneath the side here so I can see where 3/4 of an inch lines up. So that's where it is. And that's how much more space it's gonna take up in the end, which will still work with my size notebook. Now, if you're like, that's a lot of space, I don't think I want it to be that far in, now's the time to trim this down. You have plenty of space here. I would say you have, I wouldn't do more than 1/2 of an inch. So I would say you have about 1/2 of an inch here that you could trim down on the left side of this pocket. Okay, so because this tutorial is all about adapting patterns to fit your skill set, I trimmed down 3/8 of an inch from the side over here. So it takes up the least amount of space with my new additions. So I trimmed off 3/8 of an inch from the side, which opened up the inside of it, which is fine. I can baste that back together. However, one thing I want you to notice is that when you sew this in the end, you're gonna sew it at a 1/4 inch seam allowance at least, which means you might get some of this bulky seam right here, which was the whole point of avoiding this. Since I had a 3/8 inch seam allowance here, I can actually trim this down a bit. So if you would like, you can lift up this side panel strip and pull away the back lining panel and trim down some of that seam allowance so that you don't end up catching it in the end when you sew it to your exterior material. Just be careful here. Okay, so you see I just kind of shredded it down a little bit. It's not pretty, but it's gonna work. So now I can refold this and then grab my clips and reclip this. And now I have plenty of space here on this teeny tiny little strip so that I can still sew this into the seam in the end without the bulk. So now I'm going to go back to the sewing machine and I'm just going to baste right along that clipped edge just to completely close this. I'm going to baste at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now my slip pocket unit is all ready to go. So now grab your main lining panel, and before we get too far ahead, let's mark the midpoints along both of the short edges. So to do that, I'm just going to fold this in half, corner to corner, press right along the middle, and I'm going to cut a teeny tiny little bit of that corner off. I'm going to do this for the rounded edge as well. So you're going to need all of your lining pieces, so your little book sleeve pocket, your zipper pocket, and your slip pockets. Okay, so use your template to mark in all your spaces. You're going to need to make a vertical line that's going to be placement for your zipper pocket, and then another vertical line that's going to be placement for your book sleeve pocket. Make sure when you're marking the vertical line for the zipper pocket, you're measuring from the rounded corner in, but then for the book sleeve, you're actually going to measure from the bottom corner where it's straight, not the rounded bit. So the bottom corner here, measure in using that measurement there. Also mark a spot for your magnetic snap. So let's start with the card slot pocket. We're going to grab that and we're going to line it up on the left over here. And the card slot pocket's not rounded. Your lining panel is. That's okay. Lining panel is right side up. Card slot pocket's right side up. Match up the left edge and the top and bottom edges and clip this in place. All right, so once that's clipped in place, I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to baste along the top, side, and bottom edges all at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, so I basted that with the lining panel wrong side up just so I could see where those curves are, because then I want to trim down my pocket over here so that it matches up with those curves. And now we're going to take our zipper pocket, and you're going to take the right side of your zipper pocket that hasn't had the binding attached yet, and you're going to match that up with the drawn vertical line all the way on the right, and then also match up the short side edges with the top and the bottom of the lining, and clip this in place. And we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to baste along the top and bottom edges of the pocket at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then along the right side with the binding, I'm going to top stitch at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the folded edge, and then also at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the inner raw edge. So once you have both the card slot slip pocket stitched on and you have your zipper pocket, the last pocket we have to work with is the book sleeve. But I think that before we attach this, you should kind of test this out with a book that you have in mind. So since I've already made this once before, we can kind of see the adjustment. As you can see, when I line up my zipper pocket over here on the right, my slip pocket, my new slip pocket up here on the top, it comes over a bit more than the previous slip pocket, and that's because of the additions that I made on the sides, right? So that could impact how a notebook fits in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the notebook that I know fits properly in the finished one, and I'm going to lay it over this lining, and I'm going to line up the right side of my notebook with that chalk line that indicates where my pocket's going to go. And then I'm just going to flip this over, flip the flap over. It fits perfectly, no big deal. I don't have to make any adjustments. However, let's say I wanted to use this thicker notebook. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to line up the very right edge of my notebook with that chalk line. I'm going to flip this part over and I'm going to flip the flap over. Now, that is a little bit more difficult because of my side over here. So what you can actually do is kind of just twist this around how you're going to want it in the end, and then open it up and just see where the side of your notebook falls. For me, it's about 1/4 of an inch. It's about 1/4 of an inch to the right of the previous marked line. And that's perfectly fine. So I just wanted to make note of this because if you need to adjust placement for this book sleeve piece in the middle, you can definitely do that. You have a good amount of wiggle room. I really wouldn't move it to the left at all, but you could move it a little bit to the right. You have plenty of space for this to still move around. So I just marked a vertical line to the right of my previous line for this book sleeve pocket, 1/4 of an inch to the right. And that's where I'm going to install my book sleeve. So I'm going to take my book sleeve and lay it right side up, and I'm going to line up the bounded edge on the right with that marked line and the bottom edge on the bottom, and so the curved sides should be on the top left. You might want to use tape here to hold this in place. So if you're adding a little pin loop to this, you can insert that now and just tape it down and top stitch it with this, or you can stitch it down on its own per the pattern. But once you have this in place, either clipped or taped or both, we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and we're gonna top stitch along the outer edge of this bound right side at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. So if you're worried about this top corner here and this book sleeve getting pulled on over time, what you can do is you can leave your threads really long. I don't know if you can see, but I left my top thread and my bobbin thread really long on this top corner here. I did back stitch, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna flip this to the wrong side and I'm going to pull on my bobbin thread up until I see my top thread kind of looping on the back. And then I'll just use a stiletto or something sharp to pull that top thread to the back side. So now I have both bobbin and top threads back here, and it's nice and clean and neat on the front. And then all you have to do is just separate these two threads and tie it into like 3 tight knots. And this is super secure now. You really don't have to worry about this thread ripping when you're using this over time. So your main lining is mostly complete. You can take this and set it to the side for now. So now we're gonna work on building the exterior of this. So let's start with the flap and your little accent panel first. Take your flap, lay it right side up, and make sure the rounded edge is on the left if you're working with this orientation. Take your accent panel, it should be on the straight side on the right, and you're gonna lay it right sides together with the flap. Use your clips to hold these together. So now sew along this straight clipped edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Once you have that done, press your accent away from the flap, and you're going to press the seam behind the flap panel. Give it a good finger press. And then we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along the flap edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, top stitching that seam behind the flap panel. Next, we're going to attach the exterior panel to the other side of the accent. So lay your exterior panel right side up. Take your accent panel and lay it right side down, lining up straight edge to straight edge. So this is going to be the short edge that does not have the rounded corners. And just clip these right sides together. Now we're going to sew along this straight edge here at 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. Once you're done, you're going to press the accent panel away and you're going to press the seam behind the exterior panel on the right. So we don't have any seams pressed behind the accent panel. So just flatten this out with your fingers, and then you can take this to the sewing machine and top stitch along the exterior panel at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, holding the seam behind it. Okay, so now your exterior panel is completely done. I would suggest grabbing your main lining pattern piece and just laying your exterior over it and make sure it lines up. Looks good. So now I'm going to install my bag tag on the flap, which is a safe place because there's not going to be any magnetic snap on this flap portion. So to help me with that, I'm going to fold my flap in half, kind of matching up the seams here on the sides, and pinch it. And then with wax canvas, you can just kind of scrape a little bit to mark the material. So now I have the midpoint easily marked. I'm going to measure down about 2 inches from that midpoint, and I'm just going to tape my bag tag centered on the midpoint 2 inches down from the seam. I think that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine. I'm just going to top stitch along all 4 edges of my tag at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going to leave the tails really long, and I'm going to pull all of them back to the wrong side of the panel just like I did previously with that pocket, and tie them off in 3 tight knots. All right, exterior is done. So now you're going to need your exterior panel, your interior panel, your magnetic snaps, and I would suggest a couple scraps of durable material like the lining material or even the wax canvas, and then some sort of a tape. I'm using this like duct tape here, and that's going to help us with the magnetic snaps. Okay, so let's start with the magnetic snap on the exterior panel. This is going to be the female snap, which is the one that's a little bit thicker. So take that and a washer. And I'm just going to use my pattern piece for this. The pattern piece does have a dot marked for placement for this magnetic snap. I'm flipping this upside down because it does have measurements all over it, and you got to get the pattern if you want those. So I'm just going to line this up over my exterior unit here. I'm just going to use a tool to mark where that little dot is for placement from the magnetic snap. And then what I like to do before I move on is I like to fold this in half and just make sure it's centered, because sometimes my material might not be exactly cut, you know, per the pattern. So I just want to fold this, find my dot, and make sure it's centered on that fold, and it is. Okay, perfect. This large pattern piece also has measurements on where this dot should be located from the left edge. So if you want to measure that to just double check, I encourage you to do that. Okay, so I'm going to take my seam ripper and my marking tool and a washer. I'm going to center the hole in the center of my washer over that dot that I marked. And then I'm going to draw in the little slits placement for the prongs. I'm going to repeat that on my scrap piece of material, just doing this right in the center of the scrap. And then I'm going to grab my seam ripper and super, super gently, I'm going to seam rip right along that little mark. I mean, even smaller than what you marked, just the tiniest bit. You don't want this to be too big. I'm going to repeat that on my scrap material. So then we can take our female magnetic snap, and we're inserting this on the right side. So double check that your panel is right side up. So on the right side is where the female snap in goes. You can flip this over and then attach your piece of stabilizer. If you're using like a Decoville light or something, then you can just use that instead. You don't have to use this scrap piece of paper, but since we're not using stabilizer, we do want to add a little bit of beef to this. So insert my scrap, and then I'll insert my washer over this, nice and tight, and then push down those prongs in on themselves. And just make sure you smush it down really well so it's not pokey or anything. And then you grab a piece of like duct tape or masking tape, something kind of thick, and cover the hardware with that. And that just creates a smooth back so it doesn't wear down your lining. Okay, so the magnetic snap on the exterior is good to go. Now grab your interior piece. Once again, grab your pattern piece and lay it over the interior. And this time we're working on the rounded edge, not the straight edge. Match this up. I already have the hole poked out where the guide is for the magnetic snap, so I'm just going to stick my pen in there and mark it. Once again, I'm going to fold this in half, corner to corner. Find the midpoint, fold along that, and just make sure my mark shows up right on that fold, which it does. Good, good. I have another piece of scrap material here. And now I have the male end of the snap, which is much thinner. I'm going to use the washer to center over that dot and mark placement lines for my prongs, and do this on the scrap piece of material as well. And then very, very carefully rip slits here. You do not want to over rip and ruin this entire lining panel. That would be devastating. Repeat that on the scrap piece of material. And then with the lining right side up, you're going to insert the male snap, just like that, flip it over. Add on a little piece of stabilizer or scrap material like I'm using. Insert your washer, and then push down those prongs so they're nice and tight. If you want to use like a hammer, you don't have to hammer it down, but just to press down this piece here to make it really flat, you can do that. Sometimes I'll use like the end of a plier or something as well. But then once it's flat, you can put your tape over it so it's nice and protected. Okay, so now you can give us a little test run. So let's lay our exterior wrong side up, and let's lay our interior right side up, and just try to line up all the edges and fold the straight edge in, fold the other rounded edge over. There you go. Okay, good. That looks great. This is going to be great. Okay, so for final assembly, we're going to actually sew these right sides together and turn it out right side out. Even with the modifications that we made, some of these seams are going to get really thick. So you could do an alternative. You could lay these wrong sides together, right? Just like they are now, wrong sides together. And you could baste these wrong sides together so that they're just like this. And then if you have an elastic binding, like a stretchy binding, for example, here's an elastic binding. After you have these two panels basted wrong sides together, you could take the binding and wrap it around the edge and then go around the corners and bind this to finish it. That is an option. It would work just fine. There's no reason you can't do that. So if this is something you're used to working with and you want to give that a shot, I encourage you to do that. However, I'm sticking with the pattern, and we are going to sew these right sides together. So I'm gonna move my zipper pull so it's in the center, just so I don't worry about sewing over that. I'm gonna take my exterior panel and lay it right side down, right sides together with my interior panel, and I'm gonna clip all the corners and edges together. All right, once you have these clipped right sides together, we need to mark a hole for turning. You want to make sure that that turning hole is on the thinnest part available. So we want to be on the top here. So I'm going to flip this around so the top does not have the clear vinyl on it. So this is the top here and centered. And we're going to just mark a hole that's pretty much from seam to seam. So I'm just gonna feel around over here and I'm going to mark about an inch away from where I feel the slip pocket seam right there. And then I'm gonna go over to just about an inch away from my accent panel. That should be big enough to turn this right side out. So I'm not gonna sew between those two marks. And now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine, and along the straight edges on the top and the bottom, we're gonna sew at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Along the curved edges or the short edges on the sides, we're gonna sew at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So go slow doing this. I'm gonna use a zipper foot because I find that's really helpful with some of these areas where the slip pocket is, where there's kind of a lot of bulk, but it's not right at the seam. So take your time here. If you feel like you need to up your needle to a 90/14 or a jeans needle, go ahead and do that. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so if you found some of those sections really difficult to sew, I would suggest considering the binding option. I would suggest you can still do that. You can unpick what you just sewed and then turn these wrong sides together and then bind the edges. Besides elastic, you could use a quilt cotton that goes around the corners, just because the next step is going to be about twice as thick. The seams that we're going to sew next are going to be twice as thick as what we just sewed now. So it's thick seams, but with modifications, we can make it work for us. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut down these corners on the flap, and then I'm just going to trim little tiny cuts about halfway through the seam allowance on the curved edge of the flap, just to help it spread out and keep that nice shape. On the other side over here, I'm just going to cut little tiny slits into the corners. I'm going to grab my turning wand, and we're going to gently turn this right side out through our hole, gently. So I like to start with the slip pocket side first because that is the thickest part. So I like to get the hardest part over first. All right, your clear vinyl is going to get all wrinkly here. That's okay. Most things are going to get all wrinkly here. But during this turning point, it also is what's going to give your wax canvas some really cool texture, because wax canvas kind of like tells a story with the creases on it. So now carefully go and poke out the corners. Okay, so even with our modifications, we still have some very, very thick pieces here. So if you've made it this far and you're like, there's no way, my sewing machine can't sew over that, we're gonna talk about some alternatives, okay? So first of all, the reason for top stitching is going to be twofold. One, we need to close this hole on the top. So top stitching is gonna help us close that hole. Second, it's going to help keep the shape of the bag. Now, if you notice over here on the left, once you push out these corners, the shape around this is pretty set in stone. I don't think that's gonna reshape on its own. So honestly, you could do selective top stitching here, where you just top stitched along the top and the bottom and the folded edge and didn't top stitch along this side on the left. You could do that. And honestly, let's do that and just see how it looks. Let's test out that and just see what it looks like in the end, and you can decide if that's a method you wanna go with. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to flatten this out really well. I used my wand to stick in here and flatten out the seams. And then I'm going to tuck in the seams on the top here around the opening and flatten them out and get them as straight as possible and clip along this top edge, folding those seams inside. And then I'm gonna go around the entire unit here and just roll out that seam to straighten it out. And you might want to do this from the exterior side because that's what you're going to notice in the end. And when you roll this out, you're going to kind of favor whichever side you're looking at. So like for example here, I'm going to make sure I don't really see the interior coming out behind the exterior. So I'm just going to roll out these seams, flatten them out, and clip. Okay, so you see, looking at the exterior side, I don't have any clips on this side over here. I'm going to try top stitching just the clipped side and leave the unclipped side untop stitched just to see what it looks like. I can always go back and add more top stitching and clean up the tails and everything. It's not a big deal. So I think I'm going to try to top stitch this from the exterior side, but it will be easier if you top stitch it from the lining side. So I would suggest that your bobbin thread matches your exterior material if you're going to be top stitching from the lining side. And I'm going to start and stop where my slip pocket is on the left here. That's how I'm going to decide where I start and stop my top stitching. I'm going to top stitch at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you're more comfortable doing it at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, you can definitely do that. I do suggest you use a zipper foot. You do still have some bulky areas here around the slip pocket, so I would suggest upping your needle to a 90/14 or a jeans needle. And if you're not familiar with tension on your sewing machine, for example, I like to make my tension higher when I do really bulky seams like this. So right now my sewing machine is set at like a 5.5 tension level. I'm gonna up it to like a 6.5. Just a little handy tip. If you do top stitch this from the exterior side, just be warned that the clear vinyl on the bottom here is going to be sticking a little bit to your machine bed, which could cause some headaches. So if you want to put a piece of tissue paper over your clear vinyl, I would suggest doing that now just to make sure it doesn't cause any problems. Go slow, take your time, and we'll see how this looks. Okay, what did you think? I know, it's pretty bulky around the corners over here, but if you push it down and you go slow, you should have been okay. It's a lot less bulky than the corners and the sides over here. Let's just see how this looks. As you can see, I left my tails, I don't know if you can see, but I left my tails really long at the start and stop, even though I did also backstitch. I want it to be super durable. So I'm just gonna test this out real quick. So it looks really good on the front. I did not top stitch the bulky end. Let's grab a notebook. So like I'm designing this one for this thicker notebook. So let's just slide this in here and see how it looks. Slide it in, fold this over, fold that over. Oh yeah, and that looks really good. That looks really, really good. And you can't even, I don't even think the top stitching is something that you would notice over time. So if you want to top stitch the thick bit, go for it. I did that on the first one. It can be done. It's, you know, it's very, very thick. And this tutorial is really designated for beginners. And I don't want to throw too much at you guys as a beginner. So these are all different options you can do when you're making something like this. You can adjust the pattern just a bit to make it easier to deal with thick seams. You can kind of just not do some steps. For example, just not top stitching this corner. Because it is so thick, it is going to hold its shape naturally. You don't really need to top stitch it to keep it from crumbling in on itself. It's firm, it's not going to reshape itself. So to finish this up, I'm going to pull my threads through and just tie them off. I'll show you one more trick if you're interested. To make this nice and clean, what you can do with these long tails is you can grab a hand sewing needle and you can thread your thread through the end of the needle, and then you can insert the needle into one of your stitching where the thread's coming out, and then push the needle through the seam on the side here so the thread is just coming right out of the seam. So do this for both of your threads, the bobbin and the top thread. Okay, so now I've got both the threads coming out. And the needles I like to use for this is this little egg pod here. We have these in the shop, but they have big enough eyes to be able to use with thicker threads, but they're thin enough to not be difficult to work with. And now, since I backstitched, I can just trim down these threads and they are nice and secure. So I'm gonna repeat that with the other two threads. And there you go. Your little planner is all done. It is sturdy, it is cute, and with the modifications we made, it could be a lot easier. I always suggest trying it the way the pattern suggests, because you might find that you're actually a lot more capable of sewing thick seams than you realized. However, if you're like, wow, that's just, I don't know if my machine can do it, there are always tweaks that you can make to accomplish, you know, the pattern. You can always make small changes. So I hope you love making this as much as I do. If you have any questions, let me know. All right, what do you think? How did you feel about those tweaks? Let me know. Let me know. It has its advantages. It has its challenges. I personally really love that we did not top stitch this section here. Now you can see, you really can't notice a difference whatsoever. So here is the one that I did top stitch, and here is the one that I did not top stitch. You can't notice too much of a difference. I would say, I mean, my top stitching looks a lot better on the one that I did not top stitch. So that would be my suggestion. You can do this in a lot of places. If you're making something like a planner, even a bag, if you're doing something and the seam is so bulky once you turn it out that you're like, I just don't think I can top stitch this. It's so stiff, it's so thick. You know what? You might not have to, because top stitching, besides a decorative accent, its purpose is really to hold everything in place. we need it on the thinner pieces of this planner, or else it's gonna get all loosey-goosey and start twisting around like a pillowcase. We don't want that. We want it to stay in this shape. However, where we have that really thick seam over here, that's not going to change. It's not going to change its shape because it's so structured from the thickness that it's perfect on its own, so you just don't have to top stitch it. So however you decide to put this together, I hope you enjoy it. If you used your own materials, if you used some of the materials from the Bay box and some of your own materials or materials from previous boxes and you put it all together and you share it on social media, please make sure you tag me and also tag the Bag Making Bee Club. We love to see how you guys are doing this. I have had so much fun seeing people from different subscription boxes take the material from 1 month from January and use it with material from this current month and then putting something totally unique together. It's so fun to watch you guys be creative with all the material that's sent in these boxes. I hope you're having a great day. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye guys.